for the late start whilst we've resolved a couple of technical challenges in the room. We will crack on. First item is to receive any apologies for absence. I know we've got at least one substitute. Chetna for Caroline. I think we've... Catherine, sorry. Yeah, usual here. I think any other apologies or substitutes? Okay. Minutes of the meeting of the 25th of November. Any corrections or matters from that? If not, may I ask for a show of hands? Thank you very much. Any to the contrary? No. We shall move on. Declarations of interest. Does any member have any interest to declare in any item on the agenda this evening? That's going to be a no. Take the 3 questions together. I'm not sure we got any. Okay. Right. On to the first of the substantive items this evening, which is the medium-term financial plan. Tonight, we are looking at resources and assets and the chief executive. Graham, are we going straight to you? Imogen, do you want to add anything as a start, or are you going straight through?
Imogen would like to start.
I can briefly start. I mean, I'm hoping that you've all had a look. You've all looked at the rest of our budget and all the considerations, and this is the last bit before we bring the final one to you in January. So this evening you've been presented a number of options, but let me be clear, because there's been some press about this. These are not being proposed as ideas by any one party or as another, and as we know, some of them conflict with political beliefs and council decisions that have happened recently, but we have to put everything on the table as an option when we're looking at what we could do for this budget or not, yeah? So with our current financial situations, nothing can be off the table in terms of suggestions, and what is being presented over the last few months is an honest response from our officers on the options that we have and what we can consider. So what we need from you is an idea of at least what is the least acceptable and versus the most acceptable from all of you in terms of scrutinising and asking the questions as to what these things are and why we are doing them, yes? Why has Pauline got her hand up?
Surely, fundamentally, the job of the executive is to decide how to balance the budget and what to do and what not to do. Scrutiny is not here to tell you what to do or to decide what to do, it's to provide comment.
That will obviously happen eventually, but what we are doing is we're looking to see what is of most value and what is the least value. And
so we're not going to be telling you what's more acceptable or not. That's your job. That's what you're paid for.
Well, I think you'll find that we want your advice and your input on this. This is what we're after.
You're the decision makers, not us. Of course, we'll tell you what we think, but you make the decisions.
Right. We know that, indeed. Absolutely. For instance, I see our council tax relief schemes on here, which supports those on the lowest incomes in our borough and is a vital service, which is why it's being presented here is because it's slightly more generous than the national scheme, which, as we want to protect people with their benefits when they fluctuate, I would personally question any moral standing in suggesting that that budget item is cut over the other possibilities. But we're here to see what you think and what you think should the priorities be, which is why we're here to listen. Thank you.
Graham, shall we handle this in the way that we've handled the previous couple and let you go through the first bit on your presentations? And then when you're ready to pause and take questions, I think if we let you roll through the bits for your first opening gambits, and then we'll go from there. And then we'll take, as we've done before, when we move on to the actual detail of it, if we look at the first section, and then we'll do resource and assets as one block, and then we'll do for risks, revenue and capital, and then we'll look at the risks, revenue and capital for chief execs. Well, in the detail section.
Can I?
Unless you want to do something different in the way you presented.
I'll just slightly.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, first of all, just to clarify the decision, the constitution and decision-making process. This is part of, say, consultation, so discussions, airing this publicly, but also seeking views from this particular committee. The ultimate decision, of course, is made at council, So it's not even an executive decision, but it does land up at council, having been considered and recommended by executive. So this is where we are in the process of simply trying to come up with suggestions, ideas to balance the council's budget in an extremely difficult and challenging financial landscape over the next 3 years. What I propose to do, and I think it's kind of what you said, is to do the summary position bit, which is the overview and answering some of the questions raised previously. I'll then pause there, and then we'll go into resources and assets, and then I'll take questions at the end of resources and assets, and then I'll very happily hand over to Sally and team at that stage to then do the whole of the chief executives and then take questions. Yeah, I think so. Those 3 chunks seem quite logical, hopefully. So the summary position is shown on page 18, which is updated as of the very latest. Now, the most significant introduction on page 18 is the attempt to bring into account the impact of the DSG deficit, which is an extremely difficult thing to do given we don't know the rules of the game around the DSG deficit. What we do know is that from the 1st of April 28, which is the final year of the MTFP, the government, whether it's the Treasury or the DFE, we don't yet know, but in some ways that won't matter to us. But it won't be the additional deficit from 1st of April 28 will not be falling on the council. It will be falling with the government, and that's a national position. What that will mean, however, is that we will have built up a legacy debt in the region of £100 million. And nationally, there will be an accrued debt of in the region of £14 billion. So it's still a major issue. How is the legacy debt addressed? I'm hoping tomorrow, with the local government finance settlement announcement, that the legacy debt and how that will be addressed, both in terms of does it all sit with local authorities or is it partially addressed nationally, and the remaining element, whatever that may be, 0 to £100 million, what are the requirements for the council to both bear interest that falls either on the council taxpayer or can it fall on the DSG, because it currently falls on the council taxpayer, and almost as significantly the MRP, which is the repayment of the debt itself. So MRP could be in the region of 5%, interest could be in 4.5%, 5%. So it's potentially, in terms of paying down the principal and the interest, could be a 10% impact on the council. 10%, if it is the full 100 million, that could be £10 million that we would have to account for. I'm not saying that is what it's going to be, because of course we're not alone here. There's £14 billion sitting around the country that needs to be dealt with. So the precise way that local authorities are required to deal with whatever debt is left on their balance sheet is really important for us and for many other councils. If it's the worst case, then that is a very significant position for us to be in year 3, but it won't just be us. 14 billion sits out there around the country. So that's the most significant point around page 18. Page 19 is using the position of 10217, so that's kind of before we introduce that DSG component, shows how we could make adjustments, which includes a kind of a target, a work in progress target to make additional savings. That could take us to a position of, say, about £1 million, with £1 million shy of balancing the budget. Obviously, that gets worsened once we bring in the DSG position, which we don't. And the trouble with all this is I don't know how close this is to the calculation that we'll be presented with tomorrow. So just to remind you, what we've been doing is working with a national service. An awful lot of local authority community use a company called Pixel. Pixel have provided us with information. I've shared that with you. But their information, their data that they produce is hugely caveated. And only the government will know what the figure is for Woking Borough Council, and indeed whether any representations made since the policy statement are taken into account and to what extent they are taken into account. A particular concern that we had in the details of the policy statement was enacting the recovery grant for 3 whole years, the full year of the settlement, at a constant rate. And that has the effect of taking money away, creating a new pie and taking the money away from the main pie, which was to be distributed through the funding formula. And that new recovery grant 3-year position was costs about 600 million per annum, so 1.8 billion over the 3 years. That's money that would otherwise been available to distribute using the main funding formula. There's been an awful lot of protestations against that because it's clearly not based on the new formula, it's based on something historical, and is just looking to keep in place something historical which clearly overrides, and I would say undermines, the new funding formula. So that's just one example of where there's been an awful lot of noise and protestations around that doesn't feel right at all and fair. And of course, if that was adjusted back to its original state or deleted altogether, that would have quite a big impact. So that's just one component of many that can change, again, in the context that Pixel do not know what the right figure is and exactly what the calculation should be. Is just their best endeavours. And indeed, there have been 3 different versions, there currently are 3 different versions of the truth that are held, at least. One is Pixel, one's Local Government Futures, if you subscribe to them, and one is the London councils, who all club together to get their own number cruncher in. So, but all figures are different. I haven't got much more to say because I see Pauline's got a hand up. Sorry, that's why I haven't got much more to say. Just saying I'll get there. So that's page 19. And then page 20 is the heading of responses to questions. The question 1 was the question around what percentage of our expenditure is on contracts, and I said it was 40%. Pauline, I think you said you expected nearer 60%, so it looks like I was right. Sorry, I was just joking. Numbers for building control, that was just in reserves, if you remember. The reason why it looked odd is because it moved from a deficit to a surplus. So it was correct. It was a movement of 125%, but obviously that will be updated next year. And then page 22 was the question around net budget and population, so that we get a net budget per population calculation, and that's set out on page 22. That concludes the summary update with responses to previous questions.
Pauline.
Sorry, Graham, it seems to be really difficult for you because you've got no certainty at all and the variation is quite extended. I'm just wondering if we should actually have another scrutiny meeting when you've actually got some sense in this budget rather than something that's got so much wool in it that you can't actually scrutinise anything. Because until you've got a target, it's quite difficult to work out what you want to do. I don't know when you'll get certainty.
Yeah, we've...
before we set the budget.
Maybe.
Well, okay, on the question of certainty, I hope an awful lot becomes much clearer tomorrow, although it will take me a little while to work through and behind some strap lines and headlines and what have you to what it really means for us. And obviously I'm hoping that DSG is very clear as well. However, that's issued as a draft settlement, and that won't become a final settlement until somewhere in February, maybe mid-February. So even then, all the way through to mid-February, it's only provisional. However, I wouldn't expect a huge amount of change from provisional to final. We do have, and intentionally, have a date for overview and scrutiny in January, so I'll be able to give the most up-to-date account of where we are, which will include the local government finance settlement announcement, hopefully tomorrow. And it will have to set out as clearly as possible, this is what it is and this is how we're responding to it. In the other context, of course, and we discussed this here, is we are in a fortunate position compared with others in that we're not on our knees financially. So that is really important, is that it buys us both the ability to invest in capacity for change and make well thought through interventions into the organisation and beyond, and by having a reasonably robust set of balances, we aren't forced into a knee-jerk response. And obviously what we would want to avoid, this is a 3-year time, well, one could say it's beyond the 3-year timeline, but the settlement's 3 years. We could take, a 5-year view, for example. But I guess whatever we're faced with, we're not going to be in a position where we have to panic, I would say, which allows us to both make sure we take a deep breath and work out what it is is most useful to do in order to bridge the gap and to invest in the resource we need to make that happen, which does need resource because big change, big considerations needs to be properly worked through and properly advised.
So what I was getting at was, I think the last couple of years I've been through this, and I haven't done it a lot, we've always had the more information on the interim before we've had this meeting, and it strikes me this meeting's probably a week too early. And I don't know whether we're actually better waiting to scrutinise it until we've actually got the draft and maybe, I don't know, having a special meeting next week or something. I'm just asking the chairman, really, because it strikes me as it's a bit...
Christmas Day would be a bit tough.
Well, I don't mind. But it's a bit, either the local government settlement draft is late, or we've got this meeting a few days too early.
This is about in line with where we've been before.
I don't think it is.
And we normally get the settlement fairly late in the year.
No, I know we
Right-
normally
right
get it.
before
I know we
Christmas.
get it fairly late in the year, but my recollection last year was we had an interim.
We are bringing
Position.
it back in January.
Yeah, I know
As
we had an
well.
interim position before Christmas last time, Greg.
So
Can I
just
just
kind of bringing this in, right? So we've got our next regular scheduled meeting is the 21st of January, which is where we'll have the consolidated view of everything else, which sounds like this is also now going to be a much longer meeting, which is fine. I think Pauline raises a good point in some of this, that there's obviously a huge amount of work's gone into this. There's a huge amount of elements in here. The big unknown in the room is what the heck happens to the DSG and the planning that we'll have to make for that, but that's more of a year 3 element rather than a year 1, year 2 upfront piece, although there are numbers in here for top slicing, etc. So I think we should still proceed through, but I think my concern is how much change is there? What have you prepared for? Because I know we've taken the kind of the worst case or a sensible worst case element for the last couple of budgets. This is a different budget because of the because it's more the asset side and chief executive's office side as opposed to the regulatory services through children's services, etc. But I think what I'm trying to get to from this committee is a view of what are we looking at in here, and if we're expecting. I think what I'm trying to say is, for the purposes of this committee, is have we prepared for something that will get blown out the water tomorrow because we're expecting it to be far worse, or are we expecting tomorrow's to be in line with the estimates and the viewpoints and what we had from the last set of statements? It's almost like trying to level set about.
I think asking, I mean, obviously, I mean, we don't know what the settlement's going to be, but we have been here before where we haven't got the final settlement till the right last minute. And certainly the bids that are here they're not likely to change. The bids that are the revenue bid, because, you know, somebody's worked it out, said, right, okay, we need this amount of money. That is not going to change, and those are certainly worth scrutiny.
But the target's going to, so they're going to have to. I mean, if we don't know what the target is, the expenditure has to meet the target. Not an unbalanced budget.
And I think that's, you know, if you're thinking, especially if we're looking, if at some point we're going to have to try and figure out when we get the MRP, is it an MRP? Is it 5%? Are we looking at a 10%? Are we looking at 10 million? Are we looking at 5 million? That will change things materially, not on necessarily revenue and capital, but that will change things materially and cause us to have to look at extra changes, although that being a year 3 item, I still think we should.
I'm worried about 50 million.
Yeah, I'm worried about 50 million as well. So am I. But is it 50 million or does it get worse or better?
I doubt it would get worse.
Okay, so trying to unpick that, and everyone's right. This is normal, this timing, and it's quite normal for resources and assets and chief executives to come to this table before. So we run through the services. Chief execs have gone, and resource has gone first. Sometimes it's only we've picked it in this order. So it's the regular cycle of things. Is we put through all the service bids, but I start with a strategic position and I end with a strategic position. I've just thrown in a strategic position as well because of the large gap that we're faced with, to reassure you that we haven't just ignored the gap. We are looking to attend to it as best we can in year 1, with obviously an update in January. But it is quite common for the settlement to come out at the end of this week, which would have been after, or even up to sometime the 22nd, 23rd of December. So it hasn't been uncommon for me to go to the very final one in January, and that's the first time I've known. Also, if it has come out about the same time, it's often taken a while to work through what that actually means, because you have to do, it's not just that you look at a figure and that's the answer, you have to go through the real ramifications of everything.
And sorry, Graham, just to be really clear, no one is suggesting for a moment that you haven't prepared for worst case, or that if you're
okay,
do not
yes.
think for a moment that we're saying that at all.
So on that other point, so I think I was addressing Pauline's timing piece, and so I'm saying this isn't unusual for us to go as Resource and Assets and Chief Execs sometime in December, and we've even gone months before. And it's not unusual for the service bids to come through and you consider them without knowing the final settlement. So we're here primarily to do Chief Execs and Resources and Assets. What is quite unusual is the extent of the unknown, which I've articulated. I don't want to tempt fate. I'm not expecting it to be worse. So therefore, what I've shown you is my best estimate based on the intelligence I have, and therefore we've been presenting in this the summary landscape of the gap, and I'm not expecting that to be hugely different. We may be pleasantly surprised by a bit, but I'm not. I'll be like.
Christmas present.
I'm not. You know, if it's going to be worse, it's not going to be a lot worse. So basically I'm saying this is. I think it's there or thereabouts. I think the biggest issue I'm most uncertain about is the DSG legacy debt. Because that's very new, very emergent, and there is a massive question over this legacy debt and how it's dealt with. That bit, I really don't know, but I have introduced it as at least us carrying the interest cost of the full amount. So you could say I've hit the middle ground there. There's no MRP there, of course. So I think this is a wholly relevant process. And also, I would say, in line with what Imogen said, many of these bids won't change. It's just what new things can we come up with to generate income, find savings, or reduce expenditure. That doesn't mean everything we've done today is just ripped up and thrown aside, because they've all been carefully thought through in terms of their viability, their impact, and therefore what has been recommended by the lead members and directors. What it would mean, if it's radically different, is here's an extra page of things, additionality that we need to consider.
So in which case, can I suggest, and thank you for that, can I suggest in that case that we just continue on as we are? We have the meeting that's planned for the 21st of January. Well, I think hear me out for a sec. We'll plan for that to be a longer meeting than perhaps it would normally be for the wrap-up anyway. And we just need to maybe look at the agenda items, which I think looks a little lighter anyway, with the view from the committee that if an extra meeting is required to be slotted in, if things materially change and there is a material need to bring us back together if it is worse, or we get clarity in a worse way on the DSG, that if an extra meeting is required, then an extra meeting can be found and held, and we just need to search around for other dates at the beginning of the new year.
I think that's very reasonable, actually. We often, you know, it is, all of our times we've been bringing it here, it is a good guess. It's the best guess.
I think last year, I have a feeling last year, Assets and Chief Exec was first. I think we've changed the agenda items around because of the way the budgets have been put together. So I would say we crack on through. We keep moving through the process. If an extra meeting is required once you've had a chance to dissect the announcements tomorrow, once we get some certainty, plan for the 21st to be the mop-up meeting as planned of everything else and any new information to be considered as we take the report through. If an extra meeting is required, then Cara can find dates that suit for the majority of people to be as flexible as possible at the start of the year. to slot that in should one be required. So I'm not saying we definitely need one, but if one is felt to be needed by officers in the executive to bring additional information through, then we can find that date. And if not, I think we should crack on.
Yes, and obviously in all of that, you'll understand the process. We need to work with the directors, need to work with executive in order to bring something forward into this domain that we feel comfortable supporting. All this takes a little time. Yeah, okay.
You get the essence of what we're saying.
I certainly do. I'll book a B&B nearby for the night. So, well, actually, I do. Yeah. Shall I move on to resources and assets? Yes. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I just had one. I don't know if it's a legacy, but still to be calling the finance settlement impact lost council tax is a bit disappointing, actually, because we have talked about this. This relates to the changes in the government grant, in the central government grant, and calling it lost council tax. Sorry, it's on page 18 on the summary, the cumulative summary. Budget gap, finance settlement impact, open quotes, lost council tax, close quotes. Yeah. And, you know, it's just disappointing that because it's this continual suggestion that it's residents' council tax which is being diverted when it's not. So.
I think the language that has been used, certainly by me, and I think really recently by the council, is that we are losing revenue support from the government to the tune, we estimate, of around £50 million over the next 3 years. And that's, I think, what we're talking about. Yeah. So we don't need to call it council tax. But obviously, in the end, it makes no difference what we call it. We're losing £50 million of funding. Yes, but sorry, but you know that the implication is that the money that people pay for potholes and work here is being diverted to other places, and that's not the case. No, yeah, there's a whole debate to be had about it. There's a whole debate to be had, and there was during the election around, relative factors of deprivation and moving central government revenue to places where it's most needed. But it is not a question that council tax is being lost, i.e. being taken away. So I just think we could just probably
call it fairer funding.
Not the occasion to replay all the arguments about the rationale behind the redistribution. Obviously, we would contend that there are needs generated not simply by deprivation. Age, for instance, we have an ageing population. We can discuss that on another occasion.
Absolutely.
I think the point I'm trying to make is that we are losing, at this stage, our best estimate on the basis of the calculations we've seen is around £50 million of funding over 3 years.
Lost government revenue.
Yes, and the council tax we raise, even if it goes up to the cap over those 3 years, will not cover off inflation and increasing demand for services.
I think we can look at the wording, because I think that's what you find the most concern with. But it is, however we look at it, we have to find up to 50 million over the next 3 years. But in terms of lost council tax, I can understand why that is a word you don't like. I'm pretty sure Graham.
However, the government is helping itself via the increase in national insurance and the increase in the minimum wage and all sorts of other things that they're putting as extra costs into our budget as well. So to say the government aren't benefiting from this is not entirely correct.
I'm going to try and hold us from becoming a political argument on this and just kind of crack on through.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the existence of that is a partisan.
I can answer your question. You're absolutely right. this is an old summary that's obviously been updated, and I didn't check those specific words. It is an oversimplification, and I understand you would say actually a distortion to say that. What I do want to say, however, is in year one, I would say you're absolutely right, in year one, the calculation, because of our council tax level, is considered to be too high, and therefore there's a reduction in government grant. Depends how it's shown, and this will be interesting, but in the model, the Pixel model I've seen, the latest one, shows that in year two, our general government grant line goes to -9 million pounds. So we have a -9 million government grant.
This is not yet, you know, we've just spent a whole time discussing why we can't say for sure that that's going to happen yet. Yeah.
Tomorrow I'll know more.
So let's deal with tomorrow. I think the point about the wording in here is picked up.
The wording
resolved.
could say financial impact of redistribution. That's the terminology that's used in the local government consultation or loss of government grant, but it wouldn't say that, I agree, and if I'd spotted that, I would have changed it. But it doesn't change the number at the bottom. It would still say 11,317.
Point made and accepted. Pauline,
Sorry, just
quickly.
to clarify then, Graham, you're saying we would get to negative RSG in year two?
Based on how, it would depend on the presentation, but the latest presentation I've seen, which includes the core grants all rolled in, our what's called general government grant which goes to about, I don't know, 5 million or something in year one, becomes -9 million year two and stays about -9 million year three. There are ways presentationally to make that go away. For example, you can roll in the public health grant and therefore it gets nearer to zero. If you've got -9 public health grants +6, add them to, and you start getting closer. Do you see what I mean? But if there is a single line that shows general government grant going to -9 million pounds, it's hard to interpret it any way other than a bill on the council taxpayer.
So I would suggest, rather than dragging this on, when we have this on the 21st, when we have slightly more certainty in a view, that then we'll have a better view of what those final numbers actually roll out to be.
And I will bring the core spending power calculation so that you can see it, because it's on the website, it's in the public domain, and I can talk us through it.
Okay. On to resources and assets.
Right, so page 25 highlights risks as set out. I've already talked about the DSG deficit in there. And then summary position, page 27. On to the savings. All of these, I would say, are sensible initiatives, activities. When I say all of these, I've just looked at the bottom line. Sorry, until you get to the bottom line, I would say all of these are pretty straightforward initiatives and activities that we should be doing just to be more efficient and cost effective and more commercial. The bottom line there is obviously a very substantial and I understand would be very a matter of great interest. The reason why it's there is because I felt at least compelled, and Imogen's already given her account of the context of presenting these proposals, but I would say from my perspective, if I'm putting forward a growth of £200,000 for local government elections, in the context of our very significant funding challenges, it would be remiss of me not to give you a potential mitigation to consider. it would be wrong not to put that forward. I'm obviously not a decision maker, but I feel it's really important that you have before you all possibilities and options to help us balance our books. I can talk more about that if you wish, but I certainly will quite happily say that's why I think it should be there for you to consider. Then growth on page 29 sets out the growth. Again, there's big references against all but the coroner's service because of its size, but well, there's very little we can do about that. We're part of a Berkshire-wide service, so we all have to bear our proportion of that additional cost. And special item, the single special item, to help us lever in both the savings put forward, but also potential new savings that we're not aware of opportunities yet, but obviously you have to invest the time in to find out the art of the possible. Then that's on page 30, and will only be spent if that money is going to realise considerably more than it costs. Page 31 is a useful summary of resources and assets capital. There are no new capital bids, so we don't have any new bid templates. They're all the old ones brought forward. And then the list of capital is shown on page 32. In the usual fashion, grouped by lead member. And then page 33 provides explanation around some of those ongoing ones, things like the holding company loan and central contingency. So that's it from a resources and assets perspective. Probably best to hand back to you, Mark, and seek questions.
I'm going to start. Just there's a note for the benefit of those listening and those solar farm impact and equalisation reserve. Could you talk to that for a few seconds? And then specifically, then we also see on page 32 or 33, depending where you want to read the notes. I know these aren't new bids, but it's reprofiling. So there's one comment about impact and equalisation reserve, and there's another comment about reprofiling. Is that change in reprofiling, or is that those numbers aren't changing, or those aren't the same ones as last year? And then just the comment about impact and equalisation reserve as a specific risk. Can you just remind me?
Yeah,
and others.
Just before I do, can you say where the reference to the reprofiling, what page are we?
Sorry, page 33.
33.
So you've got the list of all the resources and assets capital programmes on page 32.
Yes.
You've got Barkham Solar Farm, Note 1, Solar PV Farm 2, Note 2.
Yes.
Then you've got the notes that explain that down as Barkham Solar Ride. Actually, both of them say the same. This budget's been reprofiled to reflect a more accurate budget profile based on the latest project plan. Is that a change from when we saw these numbers last year? I know this is not a new bid, but I'd like to understand what the impact of that change is relative if you've reprofiled it, and then what the impact on the equalisation reserve is as a specific risk. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mark. I will start off and with the equalisation fund, and I know I then must hand over to Sarah because she's absolutely chomping at the bit to answer the reprofiling question. So starting off with the page 25, solar farm impact on equalisation reserve. I think it must have been about 3 years ago when we were initially given certain timelines and expectations, working with SSEN, the grid, and whoever else, that we would at least we would start having a partial year impact of that scheme. So we then brought that into the MTFP, and if you went to the MTFP, then you would see a credit line of £1 million per annum, which was going to be the net profit from the scheme flowing into the general fund. So the general fund benefits from £1 million of income each year. However, it's not running. So, of course, where does that £1 million benefit come from? The answer is it comes from an equalisation reserve. Debit that, credit the council tax calculation. Now, I've been reasonably relaxed in terms of when we've looked at calculations. We've actually had a bottom line that exceeds £1 million, albeit it takes a while to get there. So if it goes into deficit, that's okay, because it will start, or the additionality over the million goes in to pay it back. But obviously, you know, this is a fluid area and time moves on. So it's obviously one of those negative reserves that you would have seen when I presented the reserves paper. And there's only, you know, so long that we can be building up accruing this deficit versus bringing in the scheme that's then performing and then contributing back to. That's what that's about, but it's no more than reminding you of the negative reserve that you saw back in October. Then the notes 1 and 2, Barkham Solar Farm and solar PV sites, mention the fact that they have been here previously, they have been part of the MTFP, as you said, but have been reprofiled across the years. And at this point, I'll hand over to Sarah.
We could tell we've planned this, you see. The simple answer is the total budget is the same as last year, as you've seen, but as Graham says, they've just been reprofiled to reflect the delivery programme. So Barkham Solar Farm will next year in terms of spend.
That's fine, and it's where, because it happened to be a note in the current plan that we're looking at where it says reprofile, so it really has that changed. I think I'm hearing the answers no. Okay, Pauline.
I didn't have a question about the solar farm, but I do now. Can I start with the election one, please, because I think it's probably simple. So you're saying an extra £200,000 in terms of election costs at RAR6 on a budget of £400,000, which is a 50% increase. If I read the paperwork, it sounds like it's because you didn't budget enough in the first place and are running a deficit on it. So if that's correct, where did the money come from last year? And where is the removal of that excess funding, if there is excess funding, in these papers? Because if you've managed to run it at a deficit previously, and you're asking for more money to stop running it as a deficit, there must be an excess somewhere else. That was the elections question. I can ask the solar farm one afterwards. So a 50% increase on the face of it's rather a lot, yeah? Which is where I was starting from, if I've understood it right.
Do you want to go with your next question while I have a look for RA4?
Yeah, the one about solar farm was, understand all this about reprofiling. We had a question or a discussion at full council not very long ago about the solar farm business case having a life of 40 years in order to be able to break even, I think it was, or to make money, or whatever it was. And yet the PVs have only got a life of 30 years. So where's the risk for that 10 years, and where's the money for that 10 years, and where's the refurbishment cost for that 10 years? I know it's a long way in the future, so I'm quite willing to believe it's off the side of the sheet.
Yeah, that's fine. And this was subject to quite an in-depth discussion at Climate Emergency over in Scrutiny, which preceded then the council question. So the business case is over 40 years, and it includes I can't say the word, degradation for the last 10 years. So as the panels, as their technology gets older and they might not be at 100%, there is an allowance in their electricity generation and within the last 10 years. There's also an allowance in the costs for replacement of inverters and bits of kit during that 40-year lifespan. We haven't yet ordered the very specific panel that we're going to use yet, but the example, they are called Tier 1 panels, and in the industry they are recognised as having being able to last up to 40 years. But there is allowance in the business case for replacement bits of kit as we need to.
So my understanding, talking to Moses, is that the Tier 1 panels are currently not expected to last 40 years, they're only expected to last 30. So is there an allowance for replacing them if that comes out to be true?
I think Moses and I had quite a conversation about the 30 years or 40 years, and we maybe slightly disagree on that. We're basing it on the industry standard of those Tier 1 panels, and the advice is that it could last for 40 years, but it advises that you allow allowance for replacement of key parts and a decline in output from 100%. I think it's down to 85 for the last 10 years. So that's how we've mitigated that risk by making those allowances in the budget.
That's built in.
Yes.
Yeah. The question is there a risk that that's not adequate, I think. But it's well off the timescale of this sheet anyway, so I think it's probably a question for the future.
I think it's one of those ones we're probably not going to get through to tonight.
I would suggest yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay, on it's R6, page 48. Yeah, I think to mesh all these numbers together, I think I need to give a fuller explanation. But my understanding of it is, on one hand, we've got the total running annual borough elections is circa 300k, but then the current budget for the activity is 419. I can only assume that 300k is a component of the 419, but I need to come back. I know that's not your full question.
No, I don't understand what you just said.
Oh, right.
So how much does it cost to run the elections every year?
Right, so there's...
It says on here 419,000. Is that wrong?
I thought that was what I was explaining. Okay, so I'll start the other way around. So the figure that you say is the current budget for the activity is 419k. So I'm expecting that, that's a very specific number. So I'm expecting that to be the full costs associated with it. But I note in what's under provide details of change in demand, says the total costs of running annual borough elections is circa 300k. I therefore, 300k versus 419, 300k, that must be a subset of the 419, but I need to come back and confirm that to you. The other point is that historically, that the council benefited from funding, which hasn't happened in recent years. That would generate an overspend, which would be, let's say, would reveal itself in the overall departmental position. So it must be offset by other underspends elsewhere in the department. What I do believe, and I will need to confirm, is that by moving to this new regime, there would be an additional cost of 200k. I will need to confirm that because it wouldn't be right, as I think you're indicating, as if actually there's a deficit problem in the first place and therefore the 200 is overstating. I am of the view that this 200k is the additional costs associated with the new way of running elections.
So this is an additional cost for doing it. What do you mean new way of running it? Is this the additional cost that it would cost for running it every 4 years rather than every?
No. This is because it's one candidate per ward. Every ward in the borough will be voted for under the moving to. So every single three-part member ward. So every one is up. So every rather than just components.
Oh, I see. So because you've got rid of the one-member wards, there is an incremental cost of having an election in every ward.
Correct.
Got you.
Correct.
Okay. In which case, it's a hell of a lot of money. It's 50% of the budget. That sounds very unlikely.
it's the numbers I've been given by the person.
Do you understand
who,
my lack of, my suspicion that it
well,
seemed rather high?
I guess it's about the impact, the significant impact of the change, and the fact that the whole of the borough is effectively up.
Yeah, I understand that, but hang on a minute, just let me finish understanding it.
I think
So, if we've got 54 councillors, and we've still got 54 councillors, and we're doing it in 3-member wards rather than 1-member ward and 3-member wards, although we will have more elections in some wards, we'll have less wards. So I don't understand why it makes any difference. We haven't increased the amount of councillors, so therefore, do you know what I mean?
I do, and I'm slightly struggling to get my head into this. I understand, it's absolutely, I totally understand that we need to have all of the options here. I think I'd like some clarity, I don't know, in a more simplistic view that just says, and we're not going to get through that tonight, but I think for the next, when we do this again, we're going to need a kind of a much simpler breakdown.
So let me explain my challenge. Let me explain my
question.
question.
If we go from how do we going from the old to the new, and there's in here it seems like there's multiple pieces of things.
So let me explain my question. Firstly, if you've got 54 councillors with 3 members per ward, you have 18 wards. Moving to a position where you've got elections in 18 wards, as opposed to elections in more than 18 wards, but some of which are not every year, on the face of it, could be cheaper and certainly shouldn't be more expensive. But in here, it shows a 50% increase in the cost, and that does not make sense.
And that's right. Yeah, I think I'm struggling slightly to follow the numbers. I think we need some clarity.
We need a justification as to why we have an increase of 50%, it looks like, in the budget, when it looks like we will have less wards and the same amount of councillors being elected in a different configuration.
So can I suggest, unless we can get an answer on that tonight, which I don't think we will, for the 21st of January or before, it would just be useful to get a summary of what that actually looks like.
This is by far and away the most significant item, I think, from this committee's perspective and beyond. So I think it's quite right and proper that we respond to all those questions and lay things out in more detail, and we can give that a good airing on the 21st.
Any more questions on that? The only other one I had, sorry, and I know this isn't a new capital bid, but I know that when we're looking at, oh, hang on, I've lost my page. Sorry, bear with me.
All the capitals on page 32.
Thank you. I couldn't get back to it in time. I'm trying to, last time I used a laptop, now I'm using paper, and I think probably laptop's probably better. This is just, it's one item, and I know that it's already in the plan, so it's not a new bid. But when we're looking at assets, especially when we're looking at the view of the world, and I'm looking at Sarah again, Copped Beach Park and Ride, I know we're looking at that for a potential solar PV site, which is a large chunk of cash. I would like at some point to understand more about, is that site performing, what the potential is in the future. I know we've had lots of conversations about other bus routes and connections to Twyford Station and lots of other different things that could come up, but that car park has not exactly been a stellar success for generation of income, for a variety of reasons. I think I'd just like to understand at some point where we're sitting on our long-term views of that, rather than investing in solar PV. I have my own particular view, which is probably well known, because I know we had a lot of LEP funding that came for this one, which is a whole different story.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see that the profiling of that is the latest of all of the Park and Ride PVs. We've deliberately kind of phased them, almost so we can test the concept, etc. We've put that one last. It's the most complicated in terms of its availability and deliverability. So all of those issues that you've just raised there and questions will be all part of that initial feasibility and discussion. So that's why it's profiled later, because there's more conversations to be had. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you very much. Right, shall we keep on moving through? Any more questions on that? Otherwise, I think we're moving on to the Chief Exec's office. Graham, are you staying for the whole thing, or are you looking to...
I don't know what I can see.
I don't know, it was quite kind of
Thanks
interesting
for the
way you said
support.
that. Right, Sally,
Thank you.
over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Graham, I think. The Chief... That's what happens outside of this room.
Oh, no, absolutely, obviously took it as such.
So starting on page 35, you can see some of the risks that we've captured there in relation to the Chief Exec's Office Directorate. And just as a reminder, our Directorate is focused on people, whether that be through our HR service, through supporting them through IT, our comms, or the people in our community through our libraries and our customer services. We've introduced a new income target this year linked to salary sacrifice. We've had some really good success of that, but of course there's a risk as some of the changes to policy around salary sacrifice might come into play. DDAT is our Digital Data and Technology Service. Apologies for the acronym. We've got savings attributed, which of course are linked to reliance with working with third-party suppliers. It's not a risk I expect to come into an issue, but I thought I should catch it. And of course, the last one on there, where we've got corporate savings that are linked to being able to support and work with services from across the organisation. That does rely on making sure that those other directorates have capacity to work with us where we've got a corporate savings target. Taking us through to the savings, so again, a little bit like Graham, the savings that we've put through into the process for the budget, we are confident we can achieve, and there's a plethora of different savings approaches. We've got savings that are linked to new ways of working and efficiencies through our Digital Data and Technology Service. We've got the income scheme that I've mentioned around the salary sacrifice and increased income in registrars. And we've also got some efficiencies linked to the way that we're planning to remodel our services. So I'll pause there. No? Moving on to the growth.
That was subtle. I didn't even get a chance to ask if anyone had any questions before you moved on.
I'm very quick.
I know. Pauline.
The salary sacrifice income car scheme income, does that get impacted by the Labour government's recent changes in the budget?
That's a reason that I've put it as a risk at the moment until we understand the impact from the scheme.
So yes, probably.
Until we've got it, but yes, it's in there as a risk. Moving on to growth, we've got some growth. We've just got one growth item for the Chief Exec's Office, and that's linked to changes that we've got in relation to reliance on this building, and modernisation or the continued modernisation of our technology services. And then moving into specials, we've got 3 specials linked to the change arm that, as Graham said, is really important to the organisation. AI and automation, people who attended the ONS Management Committee back in October, I think it was, we brought a paper that got quite a lot of interest about our approach to AI. So this is following on from that overview aspect. And then last but not least, we've got specials linked to our approach to continued early intervention and prevention to support. So I'll pause there properly, Chair, in case there are any questions.
Pauline.
Whilst I'm not in any way against AI, under R5, where do I see the savings?
So if I'll start, I'm sure Glyn will want to come in. So when we brought the paper to ONS, there were some of the questions that you raised at that point, Pauline, and what we talked about was that seed funding for this programme that will come forward to allow us to do those investments in the pilots and generate those kind of business cases. And from there, where they're successful, that's where we'll start to bring them into practice.
So this is a 3-year budget. Where are the savings in the budget?
So those savings from will be part of the business case. Obviously, that will come out of those pilots, but those savings will be attributed into the directorate budget, so they won't come out of the chief exec's office budget. As you'll see, our budget is relatively small. It'll be working with services like Giorgio and Emma and Matt in relation to place and growth, adults and children's, to see where AI can improve their services to drive the efficiencies.
So I think there's a real danger of ending up with the cost here and the benefit disappearing, and not ending up back in Graham's pocket, which is where it should go.
So I think that's a really good point, and it's one that you raised at ONS, and the response now is the same response as then, which is we'll be really clear that business cases will need to be developed so that we can identify the investment, but also the benefits that come out of that, either the prevention of growth or the deliverable financial savings.
So if I was running this budget, which I am not, I wouldn't be happy to spend 150,000 with no lines of benefits in other budgets that are clearly attributed to AI. Otherwise, I would worry that you'll just spend 150 grand on AI and you won't get the benefit that you need to get. I'd like to, I'm not running this budget, but if I was running this budget, I'd like to see some line items with targeted benefits of AI in each of the directorate's budgets.
Yeah, and I think for us it's important that we understand how, what I think I wouldn't want to do is to put arbitrary savings against directorate budgets until we've started to trial that AI solution in directorates to prove those savings can be delivered. Like I said, Pauline, that's no different to the answer that we gave to the question you raised at ONS in October.
But this is different. This is a 3-year budget, is my worry. So I agree with you. You don't want to put savings in year 1 when you don't know what they're going to be arbitrary, but I think you could easily put a target in year 2 and 3.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Lynn, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think you've answered it.
There you go. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. We can look at year 2 and 3.
Yes, Chairman, could I just add, if our estimates are anywhere near, based on your previous question, Mark, how close do we think we are to the settlement numbers, you'll see there's a very sizable gap in year 2 and year 3.
Yeah,
it's things like this that will have to be further developed to be part of the solution. So I guess I'm agreeing with you, Pauline, for sure. Things like this and all the other ways to become more productive. We have a work stream called productivity. They will have to be a contribution to that gap.
Yeah, I'd be happier if I saw it in writing, preferably blood.
Yes, I guess what we're saying is we're not at that stage yet, but we know we will have to get to that stage.
I would say early indications are good.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't be suggesting it. Well, I wouldn't be wanting to spend the money in the first place if I didn't think they're going to save money.
Agreed. Thanks, Pauline.
Okay.
Yep, so after the specials, we go on to the capital. Again, from similar to Graham, we don't actually have new capital bids, although it's classed as new, because 3 of the ones that you saw last year have changed slightly. But aside from that, the capital bids are predominantly focused on IT, and that's continuing to invest in and maintain, modernise our IT estate. And the last one on the list, which again is the second time it's coming through ONS, is linked to the community hubs, and that's obviously the community hubs that we're leading through the Chief Exec's office, but actually it's a collaborative working cross-council linked to children's services and the national reforms which require family hubs to be in place as of next year. And also the NHS 10-year plan, and looking at locality working at a more, obviously, local level. So we are absolutely working cross-council about how these community hubs can become services, not just for universal services, but across adults, children's and health. Any questions?
Any questions on this section? I've got one, but not for you. Sorry, I'm going to jump back. So have we finished on this section for Sally? Okay, great. I had one that I just wanted to jump back on, and it was a question not about the specific piece, but it's on RAR5. And it's it's not about the investing in legal services, the budget that we're spending, but this is more of those, this is another example where we pulled out of a shared service with other councils and it seems to have cost us an awful lot of money as a result of pulling out of that shared service. Are there any other ones that we pulled out of or any other changes that we need to be looking at? And where we're putting extra money in from RA5 for 26-27, are we expecting that number to grow? I know it's got 0 in here for year 2 and year 3, but is that enough? Or are we looking at changes back to the shared services model for legal services? It's a general observation. It's about, we did something that was going to save us money and bring us in-house and it was going to be all great. This one looks like it's cost us a lot of money.
Okay,
wrong,
so
but that's how I'm reading it.
yeah, yes, okay. So the question, the broader question is, where we're extricating ourselves from shared services, are we creating growth pressures anywhere across the council? Not to my knowledge. And of course, if we do try to look at that resource impact. Now, legal services, we did put additional budget in at the time we ended the partnership. Obviously it needs both partners to want that to exist, and that wasn't the case, so we didn't actually have a choice. But we did put some money in. But I think this reflects more than that. It reflects not just the loss of economies of scale, it's the enhancing, say, the embeddedness and the proactivity and the value added in the organisation. So I would say quite often things like where you share services, particularly in back office, they become quite transactional, which is, and if I was to describe, say, for example, finance or HR or as a transactional service, it is not very well regarded, respected and loved, and does the organisation a disservice. Whereas a much more integrated, value-added business partnering model is much more appreciated and valuable. But that costs to do that. So it was twofold, those stepped costs. One was effectively the loss of economies of scale and being able to distribute management overheads or what have you across a broader base. But the other is actually, we don't want just a transactional service, we want something much more value-added.
Thank you. I think it's more because we've had the same conversation about the public protection partnership as well, and this is a sum of... No, thank you for clarifying that. That's great. Pauline.
That's an interesting question. It sparked something in my memory about legal services, which might be wrong, in that there was I recall there was an imbalance in terms of how much demand each partner was putting on the shared service. Am I imagining things, or is that correct? Because one of the things I was wondering, just to go on from Mark's question, is there's 2 reasons why the cost could increase coming out of shared service. It could be that you've got more of the cost yourself and you're losing economies of scale, but you're not looking at the other half. So the bit that you left behind might have increased as well, and you're not looking at that anymore. So it might just be an increased demand for complex and quality legal services across the board, which if it had been a shared service would have been hitting both partners. But because you can only see your part, it looks like an increase of removing the service. And I just wasn't sure if you'd looked at that.
There will be an element of that. I would also say through the business partnering approach, which we're obviously working more towards, that creates more demand because you get to find out all the stuff you should have been involved in the first place. So yes, I wouldn't disagree with that point at all.
So was I right in my recollection that there was an imbalance in terms of the demand on the shared service when we pulled out? I have a vague remembrance, and
it wasn't 50-50 for sure. I can't remember the specifics, but it was all billed on hourly rates, so everyone paid their fair share. So yes, the balance wasn't, it might have been 40-60, but we only paid for what we called off.
That was my memory, but I couldn't remember because 4 years ago I can't remember the details. Yeah. Okay. It would be interesting to know if this is actually a problem or whether it's just a trend in legal services and the fact we're getting more interesting legal stuff that is happening and more requirement for legal services.
I think that's, and that was, sorry, just to come off that, that's where I was trying to get to as well. It's not, is it because there's more of it and it's more complex and it's more costly and we're not seeing the full impact because the other partners have also got their increases? So it's more about trying to get a grip with an understanding of what this actually means in reality for residents. Is it more expensive because we're doing more and there's more of it?
Or is it more expensive because legal services is just more expensive?
Yes, I think it's just, and I don't need that tonight. Yeah, I don't need that tonight, but I think because it's just come up again with PPP on a slightly different matter, but it's that I would like to get an understanding at some point just on what that actually means.
Yeah, yes, okay. We can give a fuller account, but it's all those things. This is an area that is very difficult to recruit and retain staff. This is quite common in this area across local authorities. So, and we have had in the revenue monitoring recently, we've certainly in last year we were having costs of agency staff, temporary staff, because we were struggling. We've made some good inroads now. So it is a hard to recruit and hard to retain area. I think that's probably because the movement between public-private sector isn't that difficult in this area. I don't think the boundaries are quite as steep as they are in some other professions. Yes to all those things. Obviously, we can come back with a fuller account, but it is. We are expecting more complex. Well, I guess in an organisation that wants to be innovative and wants to be on the front. For example, if we want to purchase care homes, well, we didn't always. I'm not saying that's a regular business, but it's an example. We want to do innovative things. We want to challenge the boundaries. Even we want to make strong representations or whatever, then we are creating demand on, as we move into risk and innovation, we create a greater demand on legal services. Also, I would say, and of course the complex world of working with partners as well. But also we want them, our legal services, to get involved in those more complex considerations. And so we're on the front foot of managing our risks rather than just receive what turns up at the end when we can do little about it.
And that's absolutely fine. And not looking for an answer tonight or soon. I think get through the slightly more major topic of the budget and then...
Just one small example. The more development you get, the more 106 agreements you need to draw up, and that requires the time of our legal services team.
Carolyn.
Thank you. I was interested in R7. Can I have a better understanding what it is going to entail? Because it will affect, and I have concerns about most vulnerable residents in Wokingham, so I'd like to understand a bit more about it.
Okay, so this is a growth bid which adds to the amount of money that we're paying in terms of providing discounts on benefits. So as benefits go up by inflationary amounts, in order to prevent those inflationary amounts falling under council tax, what we do is we up our relief schemes so that they are protected from that inflationary increase. So the scheme stays the same, but the inflationary effect of benefit is protected for those who receive benefits. And this is the same approach we've taken over the last 3 years, I would say, and even beyond. Or basically, we've taken this approach up to the point previously when we reviewed the scheme. So in order to do a major review of the scheme, or probably change the scheme, we have to go through a big consultation process. It's a statutory requirement. This is saying the scheme stays the same. However, we're putting more money in to protect the effect of yes, right, people losing out through having benefit increase.
Any more for any more? No? In which case, I think we look forward to the next round of meetings and updates. Wish you every good luck and all of us good luck for the settlement tomorrow and whatever that brings, and the certainty, hopefully, it might start to shed on the future when it comes to DSG and MRP planning. Look forward to hearing the updates. So thank you for that. Sally, thank you for the update, and for all of those that have been here tonight. If anybody would like to stay, feel free. Sally's running for the door. A couple of you are running for the door. Thank you very much.
Merry Christmas.
And a Merry Christmas to you all. Yes.
Yeah. Christmas. See you in the new year. Happy New Year.
I think we'll just take a few seconds to allow some musical chairs to happen. As one set of officers move. Thanks to everyone. To a weird split screen. Is there another microphone?
Just maybe put it because it's there.
I'm happy being split screen.
Well, that's good. I think we'll have all during nearly.
Right.
No, it's going. I'm better than I was last Tuesday when you suggested a holiday.
So I think just as a general observation, whilst people have, and obviously most of the officers have left, I think this has been probably a complex set of changes and budgets to run through. So thank you for all of the input from everyone on this committee. Thank you for all the input to all of the officers, for all of the work that has been done thus far, and all of the work that's likely to be needed to be done after we get the settlement tomorrow. So I think if we can, as a general observation, mark our thanks for the detail that's been provided, especially against some of that shifting background that we don't know what tomorrow will actually bring, and if that can be marked as well, and then we look forward to the next round of meetings and updates. That being said, we shall now move on to the next agenda item, which is on page 91, which is a proposal to change the waste collection frequency and refuse containment for narrow access properties. George?
Well, it wasn't, obviously, I don't know if Cara can present some slides. I don't know if you are able to or not, if technology allows that to happen, but that would be helpful if not to worry, I won't delay the committee. So the plan was for officers to present this item to you. Obviously, technical details meant that they've called in Plan B, which is me to do this. So apologies if I'm a bit kind of rough on the detail, but I'll do my best. So, Cara, if you doesn't think you can present by the look of it, okay. So let me just take members through the proposal set out in this paper, and then if helpful I can just update briefly on where we are with the mobilisation of the new waste contract as well. But headlines around this paper, so narrow access waste collection changes. We have around 500 properties which currently are receiving a weekly collection of residual waste, and they do not have a wheelie bin in place, a black wheelie bin in place. The reason for that is that our previous contract with our current contractor, they didn't have the vehicles, small enough vehicles to provide a wheeled bin service. As you know, we're moving to a new service provider from the 1st of June, which is Biffa. They have that facility, and the intention then is to move many of these properties to a service where they have a wheeled bin for residual, black bin, which will be collected on a fortnightly basis. Just to reassure committee, where those properties have no back garden or no front garden, residents will continue to have their waste collected in sacks, albeit those sacks the residuals will be collected, the black residual bin will be collected again on a fortnightly basis. So there will be a change, but they will go fortnightly. So that brings all properties into a alternative woody collection arrangement. Of course, the benefits in this is that as we've seen from the current service, it would increase recycling, it will support carbon reduction in terms of our waste disposal, and there's of course equity with all other households in the borough. The service will also pick up garden waste bins as well with that new vehicle, so that will be again offered to those residents who don't currently have that. I should reassure you that assisted collections will remain, so that's where the staff are going into properties and collecting the bins from people's gardens, etc., or outside the front door. The service commences on the 1st of June next year. We have a communications plan as part of the mobilisation, and of course those households that will be impacted will be communicated with prior to the change and supported through that change, as we did with the rollout of the wheel bins last year, 2024, I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah. If I pause there and ask any questions.
Pauline.
Thank you, George. Where do you expect people who've got no front garden, no back garden and have bags to keep their waste for 2 weeks if you're going to go to bi-weekly collection?
Yeah, I know there will be challenges around that, but what we need to do after this is subject to the exec is put in place is there will be a detailed assessment of each of the properties. We will work with those residents as well to deal with any particular issues and just work through those where there are no places to store the bins. We'll have a conversation. What I know can be offered as well is that there can be a bin offered for containment of some of the waste as well. So I think it's those conversations with those individual residents as to what can work best for them. Sorry,
my worry is a bin for containment. If you haven't got anywhere to put it, it's no use to anybody.
Well, yes, that goes back to that understanding the specifics of the individual property, there's space around them, whether there's any communal space.
But it sounds like you've decided they won't get weekly collection come hell or high water. And most of these properties that haven't got gardens, haven't got anywhere to put their bins, are also quite small. And I wouldn't like to have 2 weeks worth of residual waste in my house stored whilst you get round to collecting it. And I'm just a bit concerned about those residents that are already probably in small properties, have got nowhere to put the waste and are now going to get it collected every 2 weeks.
I think the only thing I can give you this evening is that we will work with those residents to make sure that residents are aware of the options, what we can do for them, how we can advise them. But ultimately, you're right, we're moving into that direction where we are collecting waste on a fortnightly basis.
So I understand that the new contract, I understand that it gives us the ability to do this. The savings, I have a concern that we end up having to go almost house by house and design a service, house by house, or small little blocks of numbers, or residence by residence, but house by house. And I'm worried that very soon we'll end up with a more complex system that might actually eat into those savings more. I get the direction of travel. I've got concerns that actually we end up. And to Pauline's point, I'm not sure I particularly want to. If I lived in a small place like some of the size of the properties, that they don't have the space, they don't have a front garden, they don't have a back garden. I understand moving to bi-weekly brings it in line, or alternate weekly collections brings it in line with everybody else. I'm concerned of the impact that would have on the residents of those 500. So I'm.
I don't know how much that 500 saves, or whether it's worth the issue.
So I think I get why we're doing it, or get why it's being proposed. I've got concerns that with the level of a saving looks like it's going to be 5,000, if I'm reading page 94 right. That it's a saving of 5,000 diversion of refuse to recycling, so that's what, £50? No, it's not £50. Am I getting my head right? 500 divided by 1,000, £10. I have concerns about the impact this has, and I think that needs to be looked at in more detail for the savings versus the impact on some of these properties. I'm not saying I'm against it totally. I understand why we're doing it. It's harmonising it, bringing everything in. But I think there was a really good reason why, I mean, apart from the vehicles, well, they can't have wheelie bins and they can't have some of these collections. I just think more work needs to be done on the assessment and the impact. And if we end up with a granular service where these ones stay weekly because of this reason, these ones go alternate weekly, these ones get a bit, we end up with a complex service that actually ends up costing more money overall.
I think, I suppose most of the properties, most of the 500 properties have a narrow access arrangement and will have front or rear gardens. There will be 10s maybe that, I don't know, we need to do the initial assessment, and that's the process as committed in this paper that we would do, is go out and look at those properties. I think the risk is if you move away from a service which is the same for all the properties and bespoke for some properties, then you won't be gaining these savings for sure, but you will be gaining additional costs as well to service those properties. I think the confidence needs to come in us surveying the properties, understanding where there may be particular issues, and then working with those individual residents in terms of, can we help with containment? Is there a different solution that we can help? Is there a different way of providing some solution where there's a shared bin somewhere that may help them? I think that's the approach that we're taking. But to adopt an approach where we are offering still a weekly service wouldn't deliver, I think, the savings that we're trying to make here. In fact, it actually would add to the costs.
So I think we're just saying, can we use a bit of common sense for the residents that really haven't got an option? And I wouldn't want to keep 2 weeks' worth of waste in my house, and there is a risk that some people, some people will probably fly tip it, which is the other issue you've got. So, I just want a bit of open-mindedness about people who genuinely have got nowhere to put it. I mean, I know of one house where the only place they can put it is on next door's garden. Now, I don't think that's acceptable. And I think you just need, for a small number of houses, you need the flexibility to be able to say, okay, there is no solution which is sensible. We will still keep them on weekly. It should be, 50 houses, 100 houses. It should not be 50,000. It should be very small amounts. But I just think you need that flexibility to not say, we're going to buy weekly even if you can't cope with it, but actually give yourself a bit of wiggle room.
Yes, I am. And I think the other thing is, I know you've got to go and do some more work on this before it goes through the process. If I read bottom of 93 right, and then does this go through is this the last chance we see this and we're giving our feedback and observation and it goes to executive, or is this an agreement that it's being done subject to? I'm trying to understand from a governance perspective how Scrutiny can give its feedback before it goes through as a final decision, because I think
this is, in order to implement this from the 1st of June, we need to take this to the executive at the meeting in January. So it's the next meeting of that. So this is the committee, this is the moment where I think those suggestions need to be put forward, as you've said, and it's for the executive to consider them as part of their decision making in January.
Just to be clear, that's my recommendation. It's up to you what you do.
Yes. Yeah, no, and I agree. I'm trying to get my head around the timescales of all this as it works its way through, if for an implementation in June. Mary Louise.
Yes, I mean, part of the success of the rollout of the bi-weekly when we changed was the amount of extra capacity the council put into answering questions, sorting out individual issues and so on. And that's both an extra cost, which is, to an extent a one-off cost, but I'm kind of worried that doesn't seem to be included. And is there time to put that, to have that capacity in if we are going to, because each one of these, I mean, I don't know anybody, I mean, I have several residents who have narrow access. I don't know any, to be honest, where there is no space, but I know there are also the issues of individual residents who would not be capable of carrying, a bag to the place where. So all of these sort of like very specific issues require a bespoke service, and bespoke services are expensive. You know, to move a service is going to be expensive.
I mean, just to give you, I guess, reassurance, most of the 500 properties are have front or back gardens. A few, we know, as you say, don't. The only reason why we didn't include those previously was because of we're not having the vehicle to pick up the bin itself. We have the resources as part of the procurement programme to mobilise from 1st of June to work with residents. Some residents will have day changes as to when their waste is collected, for example. So we have the resources to go and work with those individual householders. And just to absolutely reassure you, where residents are not able to put their bins out, we do have that assisted collection service, and that's an absolutely critical service which many residents use, and that will definitely stay, absolutely.
I think the only other... Oh, sorry, Stephen.
Going to say that I welcome the suggestions, but I don't think what George was saying is incompatible with those suggestions. I think George is saying there would be engagement and flexibility where flexibility was required. And just to reassure Marie-Louise even further, those assisted collections are an integral part of the way we operate the waste service, and that will not change.
Well, maybe I misunderstood, but what I thought I heard was we're going to every 2 weeks, regardless of whether you've got anywhere to store the waste or not, and regardless of whether you've got anywhere to put it outside or not, which is not flexibility.
I didn't hear George's presentation of it in the same way. I understood that George was saying there would be conversations with residents about what the best options were in their sets of circumstances. In the vast majority of cases, this should not be problematic, but there will clearly be some cases where it's more difficult. If you remember, one of the great successes of the rollout of the previous change to the alternate weekly collection was the engagement, particularly by Richard Bissett and his colleagues, with members of the public to resolve particular difficulties. And I'm quite sure that this would be implemented with the same degree of sensitivity.
So maybe, since we heard different things, we could ask George to just clarify. So if you get to the point where there is no alternative, where people have got nowhere to store their waste, where there is no way of putting them in communal bins on their own property, where they have no front or back gardens, will you consider remaining on weekly?
I think we'll do our very best to make sure that there is equity of service across the borough. Where there are absolute justifiable objections, then we will need to take a view as to how best to serve that particular resident. But they need to be exceptions, and that's why I'm taking quite a hard service line, because the costs will increase if we're not taking that approach.
So is that a yes or a no?
It's exactly what I said, Pauline. We will look at, I can repeat it if you like, which is if there are exceptional circumstances, then we will consider those, but we will only do so once we've reached the end of the road.
Okay, that's fine. Yes, but it's what I'd expect.
I think the only other thing I was going to add is, I know it's got dates in here that say implement from June, but presumably if flexibility is needed to not implement it in June and push it back, that you're not going to tie yourself in knots to a date.
Well, we're really committed to mobilising from the 1st of June. So again, I think the same answer, unless there's something happens as part of that mobilisation, so, you know, we need to delay or rethink, of course we will rethink it, but the plan very much is to start from the 1st of June.
No? Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. I think there's a couple of comments that we made to feedback to the executive from here. Unless anyone wants to make any specific recommendations back, I think our notes can just be captured and fed back. And then we shall move on, in which case, to the planning service update on page 97. I'm not sure. George, am I looking back to you first to introduce this?
No,
Stephen, sorry, my
I'm
apologies.
going to say a few words of introduction. Yes, sorry. Last month, I had the really interesting and ultimately quite pleasurable experience of sitting through the vast majority of the local plan examination hearings, first stage in week 1. It was a really high quality discussion with lots of really interesting contributions. But at the end of that first week, the lead inspector went out of his way to offer really quite fulsome praise, unusually fulsome praise, to our officers for the way they had presented the case, dealt with the questions, and showed immense professionalism. And that was my impression too. This was a really impressive performance. And I suppose my point really is that I don't believe that's confined to the planning policy team that presented for the most part. This is a high quality service, planning service, whether we're talking about policy, planning policy, the strategic development locations, development management and enforcement. They're all performing at a really high level, and we are incredibly fortunate in Wokingham to have such a high quality planning service with very professional and dedicated officers. So I really wanted to just take the opportunity to give that tribute, because I think it's only when you look around and see other councils and how they operate, as I've now had the chance to do a little bit more than I'd ever done before, I realise how very, very fortunate we are. So I wanted to place that on record.
Thank you, Stephen. Yep, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. In front of you is a report of the services performance over the last year, and with a view to 2026 and what we can anticipate coming forward through a raft of policy changes and changes in legislation. I have come a bit heavy-handed for this agenda item, so with me I've got my relevant heads of service, Conor Corrigan, Justin Turvey and Ian Bellinger. That probably reflects the fact that I've been in post for 6 months, so I can't give you a true reflection on the entire year. Although having said that, Justin joined after me, so I can't rely on Justin either to give that front of the year in terms of a reflection. But I think certainly as you read the report, hopefully you see that performance, as Stephen says, across the relevant service areas has been of a fantastic standard, and certainly since coming into role myself. You okay in terms of the? Is that the? Yeah, I don't know if that's just if I speak slightly off to the edge of that.
I just wondered if anyone's mic was on.
We had that earlier with.
Yeah.
I think in one microphone is too close to the speaker.
Okay. Sorry.
Quick and drop.
Oh, this is going to really.
Oh, this is going to. Okay.
Keep going.
So is that okay? Is that better? Okay. Will we? In terms of the. we can do a role reversal for me, but.
Now we're expecting kind of.
If
you just be on the speaker up the one you were using.
Why don't you just change seats with each other?
Oh, we could just change seats. That might be easier. Yeah.
Well, this wouldn't be scrutiny. This wouldn't be a scrutiny meeting unless we had some degree of challenges with the technology in the AV.
It was kind of booming.
It was happening.
Yeah.
It's got my nameplate, Stephen. That's all right.
Yes, I mean, I think the case made.
I was very honest with you. We told it was going to be wonderful.
And last forever, yes.
Did we have AV in the capital budget for the building?
Yes. Yes, passed without any comment at all.
Yes. So hopefully the message came across okay though to that point. Granted, there was a bit of feedback, but yeah. So certainly in respect of how I perceive the performance of the service, and I appreciate we are here for kind of scrutiny in terms of what you've read through the report. But what I have seen, certainly in my time since the start of July, is an excellent standard across both regulatory and non-regulatory functions in terms of what the planning service provides. As Stephen mentioned, I was very impressed with our local plan performance on the stage 1 period of examination. We look forward, hopefully, to having some good news, ideally before Christmas, but maybe we'll have to wait until the new year. But in respect of the second stage hearings, we'd hope that those will commence in spring in 2026. From a more regulatory function, looking at our planning performance, we consistently are one of the best local authorities in respect of our decision-making time frames, and we are consistently in that upper quartile, and we would very much like to see that continuing into next year. One of our kind of key successes, as I see it, and again, this very much predates my arrival with Wokingham, but a fair emphasis and focus of work was done on our major appeals position. So we were getting to a position where we were teetering around the kind of risk of special measures around our kind of 10% of overturns. What we have seen through concerted efforts from officers and with the external support from the likes of the Planning Advisory Service is that we have improved our performance at DM Committee to the point now where we sit around 6.5% in terms of our position on overturns. And there has been no overturn on a major decision, certainly in the 12 months I think we're at to that period now. So to touch wood, indeed, yes. On SDL, Strategic Development Allocations, we have seen circa 1,000 homes approved over the kind of last year. Many more to follow, certainly in respect of, so we've achieved our validation of the first 2 Loddon Valley Garden Village applications, which are currently in with officers for consideration. They in themselves are around, I think around 2,400, is it? We're at in combination? Oh no, more than that, sorry, 283. Yeah, 3,200, thank you. Yes, and we continue to get our reserve matters applications coming through for South Wokingham as well. So much activity, much to keep us busy. There are pressures, granted, I mean, the workload that we have in respect of a number of cases does require us to look at extension of time agreements with developers and applicants on occasion, and to a degree that probably masks some of those performance numbers that you see when we actually do our outturns in terms of performance. But I think that's commonplace across the country. Looking ahead, as I said, there are a whole array of changes on the horizon in 2026. We've had the initial legislation for the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. That is now starting to come through in regulations, so you may well be aware that there's a whole raft of new regulations on local plan making. We're moving towards a 30-month time frame from start to finish, which is quite ambitious in all honesty, and the proof will be in the pudding, I suppose, as to how that runs through. But we are, as I said, in a transitional arrangement at the moment with our own local plans, so the focus very much for the team is to see us through that second stage of hearings come spring, and then we might create a bit of breathing space to start understanding how we look at that next iteration. There are other changes on the horizon as well. So if we look at the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, we anticipate that Royal Assent will happen this week. So that in turn lays the ground, certainly legislation for planning fees to be considered at a local level. That is a key thing that we have been holding our breath on in terms of how that will play through. At the moment, our cost recovery on applications is around 60–63%, I think. So in our ability to actually run that process more locally derived and understand the actual true cost of those applications will be a benefit to the service in terms of its ability to cover its own costs and wash its face in that sense. So we have put ourselves forward through the Planning Advisory Service to kind of explore any kind of early opportunities to be part of a process to understand how that might work effectively. I think we've got some conversations in January potentially, haven't we? Yeah. So very keen to explore that. I think we were slightly frustrated that when we attended a PAS update on this and MHCLG feedback, it may not be as soon as we anticipated. We would have loved to have seen something coming in 2026. It may all shift to 2027 before realistically we can start applying that new fee setting process. And certainly in the context of fairer funding and everything else, the more we can do to help bridge that gap, the better. So we will certainly do what we can to prioritise that as we move into the next year. I will probably pause there and obviously open up. I don't think I've said anything that's not within the report itself, so if there are any questions, happy for myself or the team to take those.
Thanks, Nick. Pauline.
Thank you, Nick. It's very interesting. Firstly, I'd like to thank your guys for all the help over the weather forecasting HQ and all the nonsense we've had around the dust and things. I actually think the planning department do a really good job as well, so thank you for that. It's very much appreciated by the residents when you do get involved, as you do. I was two questions really. The first one was about how you feel the planning inspectorate are behaving and changing. Have you seen any changes in the way they behave? Because one of the things about the amount of overturns you get isn't just you, it's also the other side. And I'm just wondering if there's any difference in that. And the second question, I'm not even sure if you're responsible for it, was about building control. Whether you're responsible for it, how you think the quality is of that.
Yes.
And any thoughts you have on that?
In respect to the planning inspectorate, sorry, just to put you on the spot, I don't know if you've got any kind of thoughts in terms of what you've seen by way of appeal decisions coming through or general engagement in that respect.
Thank you. Yeah, just on that first one, not in terms of the quality of decisions, but in terms of what inspectors are being told to look at, if you like, in terms of what they're allowed to consider as material considerations when they're considering the appeal. It's tightening up in terms of it getting more towards favouring development than against. So those overturns or those speculative applications that we refuse get more difficult to defend, get more expensive to defend. So that's the sort of general trend that you see. But obviously that's more reason for the local plan to progress to reduce those speculative applications.
Thanks, Jess.
This is a test. Does this work? Yes, so far so good, so good. One thing that, just to directly try and answer your question, Pauline, it's a really interesting question. What kind of things are planning inspectors focusing on now? It's not always that they're in favour of more development, come what may. They still are very rigorous in the way they apply their understanding of planning policy. So we had two recent appeals on applications refused under delegated powers in Hurst. And they were in the countryside. And our planners put forward an extremely robust case, despite the tilted balance being against us, despite our being under pressure, because until we've got our new local plan adopted, we're being measured in these appeals against the new target, not the old one. So you would think this is heavily stacked in favour of development. Yet, if I recall correctly, certainly on the larger of those two, the inspector chose to focus on trees and wildlife corridors as really important issues. I mean, he actually made a judgment that endorsed the council's reasons for refusal on all levels, but there was a lot of discussion on trees and wildlife corridors, which shows that despite the development pressures, inspectors are still taking seriously countryside issues and issues to do with biodiversity and trees. So it isn't all a case of inspectors now are going to allow everything. They certainly are not.
So is anything taking less seriously?
Well, they took seriously countryside policies. They took seriously our existing local plan policies in assessing these applications, despite the tilted balance. So the tilted balance makes it much more difficult to defend refusals unless you have really demonstrable and substantial reasons to show that the harms outweigh the benefits. And in this case, that's how the inspector interprets it. You know, there's always going to be some level of interpretation, and that's what makes it difficult to predict.
I think I'd echo that as well. We've had a couple of appeals in Woking and Without, and the quality of, I mean, the work all the way through from the initial refusal, the robustness of the initial refusal, I think the joint working with the parish councils, but then also when that went to appeal, the inspector's view echoing, I think, to a letter, everything that we had put in as a very robust refusal, refusing the appeal, despite all the pressure in, you know, the tilted balance and everything else and presumption of granting. I was actually quite surprised by the detail that they went into when it came to that refusal. I was expecting some of our arguments to be offset or put to one side in the refusal, but I think in the two that we've had in that neck of the woods, both of them have come back as robust, upholding to a letter of, I think, what we've put in as the reasons for refusal, which were broad in number, despite the tilted balance. So I haven't seen in my own, but granted that's my own ward, I haven't seen a mass change. I'm not. No. But yes. Yeah, good. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, in terms of what's sort of easier to defend, what's more difficult to defend, it seems to change constantly with guidance. And actually, just to that point, about 5 hours ago, government launched a consultation on the new MPPF, which I'm sure Ian will talk to. I've not had the chance to read it myself, but it's, you know, it's the change that's constant at the moment.
Yes, so certainly, yes. So building control is under my remit as well, Pauline. So we have the Building Control Partnership, which is ourselves and West Berkshire. So working through ambiguity, as planning is at the moment, is very much the same in building control at the moment. I'm quite amazed by the resilience that I experienced in our building control service. When you take into account that our establishment numbers are very low and there is a reliance on agency to kind of assist in seeing us through, our ability to still meet the standards and meet the targets, we are still on track in terms of where we would anticipate to be. Recently, we've had 2 external quality assurance audits in respect of our quality management systems. Both have come back with glowing reviews and no non-conformity being highlighted in that sense either. It remains a challenging environment. There is a real challenge around resource, given that we are up against privatised firms. So, you know, private inspectors and companies are able to provide much more flexibility in the types of fiscal packages that can come forward. We have tried through market supplements to encourage people to come to Wokingham. As soon as we put out our offer, you'll find that another Berkshire authority will put out a similar, if not slightly better offer. Nobody's getting the traction, in all honesty. So we've run a principal and senior role on, this is our 3rd occasion, I think, to try and get people in, and there's no joy, no bites at all. Certainly not from those that we would entertain, you know, inviting to interview. We still wait to see what happens in the sense of the government's position on building control. We anticipate something in the new year, potentially around some clarity as to whether they're looking to nationalise or looking to retain the kind of market competition that we see at the moment. But it does make for a very difficult environment to manage within in terms of how that workload is managed.
So I would have thought an individual householder would be much better using your service because they're independent of the builder. I can understand why developers don't want independence of the builder when they're getting their buildings assessed, because they don't, you know, they're not got the same interests as a householder getting some building work. Indeed. What percentage of your householder applications are done by your building control?
Oh, I would have to take that one away, Pauline. I'm not sure of precise numbers on that.
Just curious, I used it.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious to know.
Yeah.
Because on the face of it, it gives you as a householder, or at least the reason I used it was, it gives you more confidence that the builder's doing a decent job when somebody independent's looking at it.
You're quite right, Pauline.
Indeed, I would wholly support that position, yes.
And that's my advert.
Mary-Louise, sorry, I have one, but I'll come back to it.
Sorry, yes. Yes, I mean, success brings its own challenges as well. And this afternoon, when I was watching Mr. Pennycook deliver his latest onslaught, one of the things is this, the densification, the idea that they're going to start giving permission for, larger extensions of houses and building flats and so on. And I was just wondering what kind of capacity, how do you plan for that kind of capacity? Because up to now, that wasn't, I mean, it was in the wind, but now it's kind of pretty much on there. And so you can be sure from where it's been done in other places, if you have houses with big gardens in rich areas, this is the kind of development that, you know, is extremely, I mean, in many ways bonanza to local builders and so on and so forth, but it's going to cause a lot of disquiet within the community, and it's going to require, you know, a lot of input from you, and I just don't know how you plan for that kind of, you know, surge.
I think, I mean, the market will dictate, I suppose, what comes forward in Woking Borough. I mean, whether we'll necessarily see that kind of coming through as a major move remains to be seen. So I suppose we have to be reactive to that in terms of how those proposals come forward. I mean, the interest that we see from the market is over in respect to a very specific type of housing across Woking in terms of our SDLs. So I suppose the onus and the pressure on densification hasn't really come through to this point. As we go forward, certainly the you know, we're not blind to the fact that our housing figure, you know, in the absence of our current local plan running through the examination, is a sizable challenge for us in respect of you know, 1,300 odd homes per annum to realise, which requires us to be a bit more pragmatic as to how we would consider brownfield sites an efficient and effective use of land. But it's difficult to say. I mean, each case is on its merits in that respect. I mean, from a capacity perspective in terms of officers, I don't think we would see any particular shift in that respect. I think it's just more the scene setting, and certainly the onus on that will be on developers to kind of, you know, provide through their own engagements with the communities and statements of community involvement, just how they've kind of presented that narrative as well and supported their own applications.
Yeah, I mean, it is on a smaller scale, that's the thing, and quite often it's not engaged with by major developers. So it is a different kind of enterprise, if you like. And in some cases it works really well. You get walkable, but there are, you know, you get walkable districts and good use of land, and, you know, people have homes and jobs and revenue to support public. We know all the reasons, but it is something which can come quite suddenly. I mean, up to now, it's not been something which was, you know, supported, and now it seemed at least from what I was listening with half an ear, must be said, and from the response of other parties, that it's actually going to be something which is going to be, if not pushed, then at least, you know, encouraged far more than it had been. So, yeah, it's, you know, it's just a question of how you allow for that, because it is a different thing engaging with local builders than it is with, like, one developer. Yeah. As it should be.
And certainly the principle. So I've worked in my previous role at Rushmore. We worked on this concept of walkable neighbourhoods and what we were trying to do around the kind of 15-minute place, and it does require, you know, certainly if I think about, okay, what might we need to change in respect of our current position on these? You look at parking standards as the first port of call. What is our current position at Woking in that respect? And if we're looking at densification, what is our argument and our rationale to actually support a shift away from that? And that is quite a, you know, a substantial shift to grasp with in terms of the kind of the carrot and stick scenario as to, you know, what is your justification for this, and how do you bring people on that journey with you? But I think that, you know, the way in which we've tailored our local plan allows for flexibility of those kind of matters to be kind of picked up through supplementary guidance and how we can actually kind of flex to those kind of demands. But yeah, I mean, it is a wait and see as to how that kind of pushes through into our local domain.
Yeah, I think it will have an impact in not this current local plan that's set examination, but obviously the next one, where we do have to deal with much higher housing numbers. I think we will then, the pressure on intensification of land use will be very great. We'll be struggling with land allocations to have enough land available to build all the houses that were required of us. It's a really genuine challenge. If you're talking about the idea of increasing densities in places where already housing exists as opposed to on new sites. That's a more problematic thing because obviously there's already been backland development, the sale of bits of garden for new dwellings to be built. This has been a long-term trend. In that sense, it's not new, but to assemble a significant amount of land by purchasing from lots of different owners is in itself a quite major operation. It's not an easy way of increasing density. What is easier is if it's in a planned way and on a larger scale. So there is an example of where there's been a really successful intensification of land use, but at a higher quality, and that's Gorse Ride, our own housing developments in Finchampstead, where effectively poor substandard housing at less density has been replaced by high quality new housing at much higher density, and yet the quality of life of the people moving into it is much higher. So higher density does not necessarily mean worse housing.
No, I would never say it is, but I think what we're talking about was something actually quite much more small scale. I mean, what Pennycook was talking about this afternoon was, which surprised me, was the thing of, you know, on an existing plot of land, you will be able to build, I think, up to two times the size of the footprint of the original house. And you'll be, you know, and in Croydon and Beckenham, where you have sort of a similar wealthy area with some places with big gardens, there has been this sort of pattern of building, mid-rise blocks of flats in the back. I mean, we're not going to obviously talk about it here. I'm just interested in terms of how a planning department, how you respond to, because I couldn't believe it when I heard him say it, let alone, and I don't have to do anything, you know, but people are going to be calling on you saying this is now the policy. So, you know, do what you have to do to let me build a mid-rise block of flats in my back garden.
I will pass it just to, I mean, I suppose it's the route by which that comes through. I mean, I mean, I need to catch up on what Mr. Pennycook has said, because I've not heard that, but yes, but Matthew, yes. We're not on first name terms, but yeah, in that respect, I mean, if he's talking about kind of changes to permitted development or kind of whatever route there is for that to kind of be realised, it's understanding, you know, what perspective we can apply to it from a planning lens.
Sorry, I missed those announcements this afternoon, but actually we're used to dealing with sort of variations on that. Over the past few years, there have been permitted development rights to introduce additional floors to properties and to have larger extensions to properties. And it takes some getting used to, but there's always caveats around how that impacts upon the character, and I'm sure there will be when that feeds its way through in the system. So we'll deal with those. I mean, going back a few years, we had what we used to call backland development, which was people trying to build in back gardens, and we dealt with that and developed policies around that about how to control it. And more recently, we've had to deal with things like permitted development, change of use of offices to residential, and town centre buildings to residential as well. And again, I mean, they're great to an extent because we're limited in what we can deal with there. We lose things like affordable housing contributions in there. But we've worked out, you know, ways to deal with those sorts of schemes, and I'm sure we will do when we see the full details of what's coming through.
So if I just add very briefly, I've only had a very scant look at the new NPPF, so I'm not going to claim I know everything in it by any means. But in terms of development densities, it's referring to 40 or 50 dwellings per hectare, which, to give that in context, is sort of small house moving onto a mixed scheme type scale. So it's not got a defined. Sorry, this is causing an issue now, isn't it? Yeah. So it's not talking about high rise in that sense in the NPPF. But just to assure you, in terms of the infrastructure side, if a local plan is being progressed, then we do share the potential land supply information with service providers at a very early stage to try and understand the implications of where development is being placed. So be that a new community or be that intensification where we think that may come forwards. So we'll try and deal with the practicalities. But as Justin said, it's about balancing the opportunity and constraints, making sure things happen in the right places, not the wrong places, and just trying to deal with the issue sensibly as we move forward. But it is possible to put in place sensible policies, sensible approaches, but there are compromises or things become slightly more hard if you're developing within an existing community. It's because you can't plan the infrastructure in from scratch, so you tend to find there are some compromises, be it cycle routes, be it connectivity, etc.
Absolutely.
But there are, of course, advantages that you can take account of easier.
And that's a capacity issue as well, because it takes, even though you might be producing kind of a mid-rise block of 3 flats, you are having to deal with, you know, many neighbours, a lot, you know, and the whole process is going to be in a way much more intense and much more, you know, much more potentially difficult. And that's, again, this issue of capacity, isn't it? If you're, do we have or can we get the surge capacity to deal with, you know, that should it happen? But I think the sort of the 50 houses, that's to do with the building around stations, isn't it? Not the sort of, that's not about back gardens. But anyway, you know, things can change really quickly. And there's this kind of, you know, the balance between the needs of building houses and the concerns of existing residents. So it's just there's always going to be, you know, that capacity is going to fluctuate, and also needs to be based on local, you know, institutional knowledge and institutional memory as well. It's very difficult to build it when you don't have somebody who knows the area well, the town well, you know, the situation.
Thank you. On page 106, you mentioned we got a grant to improve our computer services. I was just wondering, is that enough to do it? Because I got quite excited because I sit on early town planning and I thought of getting extra information sounds great. I'm not sure 50,000 sounds enough.
I absolutely agree. That was the maximum amount of funding that was available, and we've secured it. But you're absolutely right. It doesn't go to secure any sort of new IT systems, for example. I think what it does is do a sort of sense check of where you are, what's available in the market, and it may be that it results in more expenditure later down the line because you look at all these fancy things that are available. But it's basically not the answer to everything. It's just the starting point to see where you are compared to others and what's available on the market.
I think just before I go to Pauline, off the back of that, I think the comment that I do get from residents actually is, I mean, in addition to echoing the points that have been made about the excellence of a service and what residents get, I think that sum up in that in a minute. The comment that I do get from people is actually the systems that we have to use when residents are searching for things. So our own website, which is not our own planning site, it's the services that we're using, actually are not keeping up with modern technology. And just to be really clear, for anyone listening, it's the same problem that every council has because we're all pretty much using exactly the same system. And I think there's a disservice that's done where people think actually it is our platform when it's actually not ours ourselves. So I think whilst 50,000 is great, it's a tiny drop in the ocean to what it's going to end up costing councils all over the country. But I would like to hope that we will get improvements as technology eventually catches up with, or our services catch up, technology catches up with the 21st century, maybe?
Sorry, just on that point there, MHCRG aren't the quickest at kind of embracing digitisation. And absolutely fair points in respect of our systems. I think, you know, for the last 10 years, we've grappled with a system that when we brought it on board at that time was already kind of getting towards the end of its shelf life. We are in the process of shifting that out and bringing in a new system with the hope that, optimistically, he says, so at some point in 2026 that could be rolled out. But certainly our existing arrangement with current provider runs to no later than March 2028. So bearing in mind that this new system isn't just for planning, it's also for environment and safety. There's quite a span in respect of what that needs to cover off. But the prioritisation has been on the planning side of that in respect to getting the data work done in the background by Graham in Justin's team, colleagues, and that very much will aid us in respect to it being a kind of browser-based system, which gives us more flexibility in terms of what we can do in terms of the public-facing elements of it, but also how it can talk to other kind of systems internally as well. So much more around automated processes, hopefully being a bit more user-friendly in respect of how members of the public engage with the systems that we have. But yeah, it's actively a work in progress.
I remember elsewhere when that was rolled out, and even back then it was really not. Yeah. Yes, Pauline.
Just thinking about some of the changes that are happening in the way people are developing stuff. We're seeing a lot more HMOs in Early and in Shinfield, and a lot more, they're not, sort of children's home type HMOs, those sort of things, rather than HMOs. Change of use. We're seeing increasing issues with parking from HMOs, and we're also seeing quite a lot of little bungalows appearing in people's gardens that allegedly are not for independent habitation, but generally look like they might be. I'm wondering, are you planning any changes to the Borough Design Guide, because it's quite old now, to take account of the changes in what people are doing?
It's not something that's on the radar as such at the moment. Certainly, we would probably have to take that conversation away. To be honest with you, I wasn't aware of our Borough Design Guide. So in six months in post, I should probably know that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great document. I mean, the point around HMOs, I mean, I suppose it's a watching brief on that one, and certainly in respect of, if I take this to kind of wider context around kind of housing asylums and how we're currently dealing with the hotel matters there, and thinking about dispersal, what might be the next steps in terms of where that shift goes to. There may be more pressure on HMOs and so forth. So it's certainly something if we feel that there are things that require some kind of follow-up there, Pauline, we will look at that in respect of bungalows with additional buildings in the garden, which we question whether they are ancillary.
Yeah, so I think it needs a bit of a tweak, potentially. I don't think it needs... When I remember when it was written, it was Angus Ross that did it, so it was quite a long time ago. It must be 8 years ago, something like that. And it was a lot of work. But I think we keep getting the answer, oh, it meets the design guide. Well, actually, it doesn't help the residents or meet the requirements. And I'm just wondering if it's a review of that to cope with, I think more than half of the HMOs, I think most of the HMOs are either in Shinfield or in Early, partly because we're near the university, and also partly because of just the size of houses and all that sort of stuff. So I think it would be useful to have a review of that, just to see if it needs tweaking.
Just to clarify, Angus may well have overseen it. I didn't think he wrote it.
He did a lot of work on it.
I'm sure he did, but it would have been written by a professional.
If I can, just very quickly. Sorry. Just on the design guide, it has been mentioned by various councillors over the last couple of years, and I know Wayne Smith instigated a questionnaire around all councillors a couple of years ago, sort of asking people to promote issues to us, which we didn't get much back to, but there is nothing stopping us updating that guide. The general position, I think, from an office perspective is let's settle the new local plans policies and then do a holistic update. But if there is an urgent issue which is causing residents more than normal concern, shall we say, then please message me or message Nick, and we'll look at it in the shorter term. But I would expect a more holistic update once our new design policies are settled.
And that's really what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for a change now. I was just thinking, with the changes in behaviour, the changes in developments, the changes in permitted development, the changes in what people are actually doing, it's probably going to need a review at some point in the near future. I wasn't suggesting it needed an urgent review. The second thing was I asked a question in council probably about a year ago about whether we should start mandating planning notices again outside houses so that people actually put them out. Because a lot of people, we don't tell a lot of people about planning applications. They don't know about them. They don't look on the website, and as a result, they can't comment about it on them in a lot of cases until they're already approved. And with the volume, I think things get missed. And I'm just wondering, and I did ask it to council, and I haven't got a response yet, as to whether we should actually review asking people to put a notice out again.
take that if you want. Thank you. The statutory requirements, there's some requirements for larger applications, but on smaller applications, it's either to consult adjoining properties in writing or to have a site notice, either or. So we meet the statutory obligation. I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but one of the things I'd like to look at with that sort of 50,000 funding is the potential for people to be able to self-serve in the future, perhaps to sort of overcome that gap in sort of people not being able to receive the consultations because they missed the letter or the site notice.
So I know at least two councils, one of which is Ealing, who do both. And it actually, to ask people to put a site notice out doesn't cost anything.
It doesn't, but they may not necessarily do it.
Yeah, but at least if you ask them to, most of them will. If you don't ask them to or don't tell them to, none of them will. And I think it might just increase awareness. And I know there are at least two, I can't remember the name of the other London council that does it, but Ealing certainly does both site notices and notifications. And I think it would help people understand what's being planned.
I know it's something that causes a fair few complaints in terms of the proportion of complaints that I come through my desk. It's probably one of the biggest ones about people not being aware of it. So it is something I'd actively try and look at in terms of making people more aware of applications.
Could I ask you to have another think about it?
We can have a think about that, Pauline. Yes. Yep.
Anything else? No? In which case, I think I echo Stephen's comments on the quality of the update tonight it doesn't do the service enough justice for the work that it does. So please pass on those thanks. But I think also, echoing Stephen's comments, it would be remiss of us not to mark the incredible job that was done for the local plan process. So, when you look at that, and I know we're waiting to hear on the next steps, and I'm hoping that it will go as we're hoping it will go. But I think the quality of the officers that we have working in that department, for the quality of the plan that was put forward to the inspector, given all of the other noise that's been around it, I think, please pass on our thanks for that. Whatever your view is on sites that are inside it, the quality of the representation and the service on behalf of residents at presenting that at inspection was absolutely top notch. So my thanks and our thanks to that. Right, you're more than welcome to stay. I think there's nothing else. We might get through the next two items before you've cleared through. And a Merry Christmas to you guys as well. Right. Let's go. Next item. We are looking at the forward plan for the meeting of the 21st of January, which may or may not be longer than needed, depending on what happens over the next 24, 48 hours. But the next one is the consolidated update, picking up all the feedback, everything else that we've done, and any updates from Graham.
Talking about waste and management, what was discussed earlier, meeting?
Don't know if George will have. George, the next one's got the waste collection and street cleaning. That's the general.
That's the mobilisation.
That's the mobilisation.
Yeah. So we didn't touch on that today in the end, but we were already planning to come back to that January meeting with a full update on that.
Okay. We've got the delayed adaptive street lighting, which I think has been put off a couple of times, coming here. So looking forward to that. Any other comments? And then we're seeing again in March, local transport plan, and it's quite funny to see this quiet back down. Anything else? If not, we'll move on to the next and final agenda item, which is the action tracker. Any comments or items on there? I only had a quick update, a quick ask, which can come back to me, which was on 9 Mile Ride, but I'll send an email, because we had some flooding down there at the 9 Mile Ride, new working road junction again, which I thought we'd fixed, but I'll send an email. If nothing else, no, have a wonderful Christmas, Merry New Year, and we'll see you all soon.